The morning I found concrete barriers blocking my driveway for the third time that week, I immediately called my army buddy and said 5 words that would destroy our HOA president. I need something permanently immovable. December in Colorado, 6 a.m. I'm standing in my bathrobe, phone pressed to my ear while steam rises from my abandoned coffee mug. 3 concrete blocks positioned like prison walls across my own driveway. That sharp metallic scent of fresh concrete mixing with diesel exhaust, making my blood boil. Delilah Thornberry thought she was harassing some helpless divorced veteran who'd roll over and pay her ridiculous fines. What she didn't know was that she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 20 years moving tanks and artillery for Uncle Sam. 4 months later, she'd be screaming at news cameras about my aggressive concrete fortresses while packing moving trucks in disgrace. All because she never learned the first rule of warfare. Never corner someone with superior firepower and unlimited patience. What would you do if your neighbor weaponized bureaucracy against you? Drop your HOA horror story below. My name's Marcus Rivera, and 6 months before this concrete war erupted, I thought I'd finally found peace. 52 years old, freshly divorced after my ex cleaned out half my savings, with 20 years of moving tanks and artillery for Uncle Sam behind me. I'd scraped together enough for a down payment on this corner lot in Willowbrook Estates, suburban Denver, specifically because of that beautiful circular driveway. See, after 2 decades of following other people's orders, my little IT consulting business was my shot at independence. The circular driveway meant clients could park without blocking neighbors. I'd learned to think 3 steps ahead in the Army. I'd studied every legal document before buying, deed restrictions, HOA covenants, municipal codes, nothing, and I mean nothing, prohibited home-based consulting. Then I met the neighborhood dictator. Delilah Thornberry was 48 going on feudal lord, with perfectly bleached teeth and a white Mercedes she polished like a shrine every Sunday. She lived in the McMansion at the end of the boulevard, the one with the circular fountain that violated 3 different water restrictions. HOA board president for 3 consecutive terms, which should have been a screaming red flag visible from space. Real estate agent by day, petty tyrant by calling. Our first encounter went down on a Tuesday morning in October. I'm loading network equipment into my F-150 when this woman just appears in my driveway, didn't knock, didn't introduce herself, just materialized like a suburban demon clutching her clipboard of doom. "You need to move that commercial truck immediately," she announced, not even bothering with hello. I looked at my 3-year-old Ford, identical to half the driveways in the neighborhood. "Ma'am, this is my personal vehicle, which you use for commercial purposes." She clicked her gold pen like a weapon. "I've been documenting the traffic to your residence, multiple vehicles per week. This disrupts our community standards." The stench of her cloying perfume, something that smelled like roses soaked in hairspray, made my eyes water. But it was her tone that really got me. That dismissive, talking down to the hired help voice that instantly transported me back to every power-hungry officer I'd ever wanted to throttle. "I'll review the covenants," I said, keeping my army poker face locked down. "You do that?" She turned on her designer heel, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus? We run a tight ship here. Some people just aren't Willowbrook material." 3 days later, she dropped the hammer, a violation notice demanding $150 for unauthorized commercial vehicle storage and threatening $500 daily fines if I didn't cease all business activities within 7 days. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with legal threats that would make a loan shark blush. I spent my weekend at the kitchen table swimming through every document I'd signed. Deed restrictions, subdivision covenants, county ordinances, mountains of legal paper that said absolutely nothing about prohibiting home offices or client visits. But buried on page 47 of the HOA handbook, I found her weapon, a deliberately vague commercial vehicle clause written so broadly it could ban pizza delivery. When I called for an appeal hearing, her assistant chirped that the earliest opening was 6 weeks out. The fine deadline? Still 7 days. Classic extortion. Pay up or face escalating penalties while you wait for justice. But Delilah had made one crucial mistake. She'd tried to intimidate someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with actual life-or-death logistics problems. Someone who understood that bullies only respect superior firepower. So I paid her blood money, filed the appeal, and made 2 strategic decisions. First, I was going to document everything she did from now on. Security cameras, timestamps, the works. Second, I was going to study this woman until I knew her weaknesses better than she did. Because Delilah Thornberry had just declared war on someone who specialized in winning wars through superior preparation and overwhelming response. The taste of that humiliation burned in my mouth for weeks. But every time I wrote another check to her HOA kingdom, I reminded myself, patience builds the strongest foundations, and I was about to build something she could never tear down. The security cameras I installed in November turned out to be the best investment I ever made. 4 high-definition units with night vision positioned to cover every angle of my property. Within 2 weeks, they caught something that made my blood boil and sent chills down my spine at the same time. Delilah Thornberry, measuring my driveway with surveyor's tape at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I'm sitting in my kitchen the next morning, coffee growing cold in my hands, watching this footage on my laptop. The infrared cameras captured everything in crisp black and white. Her white Mercedes parked 3 houses down like a getaway car, those designer boots crunching through frost, that same clipboard clutched against her chest as she documented dimensions and angles with the methodical precision of a crime scene investigator. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She'd trespassed on my property, at minimum on the easement, to gather ammunition for whatever legal assault she was planning next. The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as I watched her measure the exact spots where my clients typically parked. But here's where Delilah made her first catastrophic miscalculation. She had no idea I was documenting her every move. The confrontation erupted the next morning. I was loading network equipment when she approached, wearing that practiced smile that could freeze hell over. "Marcus, we need to discuss your ongoing driveway situation." "Funny you should mention driveways," I said, keeping my voice conversational while my pulse hammered. "I was just reviewing some fascinating security footage from last night. Didn't know midnight property surveying was such a popular hobby in Willowbrook." For exactly 3 seconds, her mask cracked. I caught a flash of genuine panic before that plastic smile locked back into place like armor plating. "I was conducting a routine community assessment," she said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "The board has received numerous complaints about your commercial activities disrupting residential tranquility." "Complaints from who, specifically?" "That information is confidential board business." Of course it was. I pulled out my phone and showed her a crystal-clear still frame from the cameras. Her crouched next to my driveway at midnight, measuring tape glinting in the infrared light like a weapon. "This midnight assessment, that's also official board business? Because I've read our procedures manual cover to cover, and I must have missed the section about stealth property evaluations." Her jaw muscles tightened like steel cables. "You're being deliberately obstructive, Marcus. Some residents simply don't comprehend community standards or their obligations. And some board presidents don't comprehend property law." I leaned against my truck, letting that accusation hang in the frigid morning air. "But I'm always eager to learn. Walk me through exactly which covenant prohibits my consulting business." She launched into the same tired commercial vehicle rhetoric, but this time I was locked and loaded. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights researching Colorado HOA statutes, diving deep into case law and precedent. What I'd discovered would have made my old Army intelligence officers proud. In Colorado, HOA boards could only enforce covenants that were explicitly written and properly adopted through legal procedures. Vague interpretations and creative readings meant absolutely nothing in court. "That's absolutely fascinating," I said, savoring each word. "Because according to Colorado Revised Statutes Section 38-33.3-209, HOA enforcement requires specific covenant language. Boards cannot manufacture new restrictions through creative interpretation of existing rules." The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in the space between us. Her smile transformed into something sharp enough to cut glass. "We'll see about that interpretation," she said, each word dripping with menace. "Emergency board meeting, Thursday night, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late." Thursday night's Kangaroo Court was a masterpiece of bureaucratic theater. 5 board members arranged at a folding table in the community center like judges at a medieval tribunal, with Delilah presiding over the proceedings like she was sentencing criminals. Maybe 15 residents scattered throughout the room, and I immediately noticed that none of them lived anywhere near my property. Delilah opened with a PowerPoint presentation worthy of a congressional hearing, preserving community standards in Willowbrook Estates. Professional slides, dramatic lighting, complete with aerial photos of my house that made my modest corner lot look like some kind of industrial complex. "As these documented images clearly demonstrate," she announced, clicking through slides with prosecutorial precision, "we have irrefutable evidence of excessive vehicular traffic, commercial vehicle storage violations, and business activities fundamentally incompatible with residential community standards." Her photographic evidence was selectively brilliant. Camera angles that made my F-150 look like a semi-truck. She'd captured the one afternoon I had 3 client vehicles simultaneously, a scheduled emergency network repair that lasted exactly 97 minutes. When my turn finally arrived, I stood slowly and pulled out my own ammunition. Thank you for that presentation, Delilah. I've prepared some supplementary materials. I distributed copies of the actual HOA covenants with relevant sections highlighted in bright yellow. Page 12 explicitly permits home-based businesses provided they don't create documented nuisance conditions. Page 15 defines commercial vehicles as those exceeding 10,000 pounds gross weight. My truck weighs 6,200 pounds. I watched faces around the room as residents read the actual rules, probably for the first time since buying their homes. Several eyebrows shot up in obvious surprise. Additionally, I've meticulously documented my client visits over 3 months. Average of 2.3 vehicles per week, visits averaging 47 minutes duration. Well within reasonable parameters for professional services in any residential community. Delilah's smile had fossilized into something resembling a death mask carved from ice. Finally, there's a significant procedural issue with tonight's meeting. Our bylaws require 72-hour written notice to all homeowners for emergency sessions. This meeting was announced Monday evening via email exclusively, a clear violation of Colorado HOA statutes. The room exploded in whispered conversations as homeowners realized they'd been systematically excluded from proper notification. 2 board members exchanged glances that suggested they hadn't known about the notice requirements either. Delilah banged her gavel like she was hammering railroad spikes. This meeting will proceed exactly as scheduled, regardless of frivolous procedural objections. Actually, interrupted a calm voice from the back row, I believe we need to table this discussion until proper legal notice is provided to all affected parties. Frank Kowalski rose slowly from his seat, 70-something with silver hair and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. I've been reviewing the statutes Marcus cited, and his procedural objections are absolutely correct. This meeting violates multiple requirements. That moment changed everything. I'd found my first ally in what I now understood would be a very long, very expensive war. Frank's intervention killed Delilah's kangaroo court faster than pulling a fire alarm. Board members scattered like roaches when the lights came on, mumbling about proper procedures and rescheduling. But I watched Delilah's face as the room emptied, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Pure, concentrated hatred radiating from those perfectly lined eyes like heat from molten steel. She wasn't done with me. She was just getting started. The next escalation hit exactly 1 week later at 6:17 a.m., and it was designed to destroy me financially and emotionally in one calculated blow. I stumbled outside in my bathrobe for my morning coffee run and found an empty driveway where my truck should have been. Not stolen, something worse, towed. A bright orange violation sticker was slapped across my garage door like a death certificate. Illegally parked vehicle removed per HOA authority. Final notice. The paper was still warm from whatever printer had birthed this bureaucratic assassination. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the towing company. The dispatcher's voice dripped with the special indifference reserved for people whose lives had just been upended. Vehicle removed from Willowbrook Estates for parking violation. Release fee $350 plus $25 per day storage. Cash or certified check only. No exceptions. I was parked in my own driveway, I said, my voice cracking like a teenager's. Take it up with your HOA, buddy. We just follow orders. Orders. That word hit me like a physical blow. 20 years following legitimate military orders, and now some suburban tyrant was issuing commands about my own property. Frank Kowalski appeared at my door 20 minutes later with coffee and the grim expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. The drive to the impound lot felt like a funeral procession, complete with Frank explaining Colorado's towing statutes in his measured attorney voice. Legitimate HOA towing requires 48-hour written notice, he said, navigating through morning traffic. Posted warnings in violation areas, photographic documentation, board approval for each removal. Did you receive any advance notice? Nothing. Parked there Sunday night, same as always. Frank made careful notes in his leather portfolio. Then what happened to you constitutes predatory towing under Colorado law. The penalties for that can be severe, up to treble damages plus attorney fees. The impound lot was a monument to human misery. Gravel and razor wire, the acrid smell of motor oil mixing with desperation, and my truck sitting behind chain link like a political prisoner. $350 in cash, money that was supposed to cover groceries for 2 weeks. And I was reunited with my vehicle while Frank documented everything with his phone camera. The drive home was silent, except for the sound of my financial security crumbling. That evening, I was uploading photos of the illegal towing when my doorbell chimed. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson stood on my porch with a casserole dish and the expression of someone bearing witness to an atrocity. "Marcus, honey, I saw what that horrible woman did to your truck. I had to bring you something." Eleanor was 76, had buried her husband 3 years ago, and possessed the kind of quiet dignity that made you want to confess your deepest fears. She handed me a dish that smelled like childhood comfort and maternal love, exactly what my shattered nerves needed. "Mrs. Patterson, you didn't need to." "Yes, I did." Her voice carried steel beneath the kindness. "Because what Delilah did to you, what she's been doing to all of us, it's evil, pure and simple." She told me about the Kellys' swing set execution, how Delilah had demanded they dismantle their children's playground within 48 hours for violating aesthetic harmony guidelines that existed nowhere in our actual covenants, how little Sarah Kelly had cried watching her father take apart her favorite place in the world while Delilah watched from her Mercedes, taking photos like she was documenting a crime scene. "They couldn't fight it," Eleanor whispered, glancing around as if Delilah might be listening from the shadows. "Danny Kelly works 2 jobs just to make the mortgage. They don't have lawyer money or fight left in them." The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth. How many others? More than you'd think. The Garcias got fined for their vegetable garden, the Johnsons for their dog run. She's been systematically terrorizing anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. After Eleanor left, I sat in my darkened kitchen eating her casserole and planning war. Because that's what this had become. Total war against a woman who used bureaucracy as a weapon of mass destruction. I spent 3 hours researching predatory towing penalties. In Colorado, victims could recover 3 times actual damages plus attorney fees. My $350 theft could cost Delilah over $1,000 if I played this right. But more importantly, I started a new computer file. Delilah Thornberry, Financial Vulnerabilities. If she wanted to hit me where it hurt, I was about to return the favor with interest. My security cameras delivered the perfect gift the next morning. Delilah's Mercedes parked outside my house at 6:23 a.m., with her taking surveillance photos of my property, building her next case, documenting ammunition for whatever fresh hell she was planning. But those photos also captured her license plate, her face, and the timestamp proving systematic harassment. The hunter had just become the hunted. Delilah's surveillance photos turned out to be the opening shot of what I can only describe as psychological warfare. She wasn't just building a case anymore. She was orchestrating a full-scale character assassination designed to turn my own neighbors against me. The attack came 2 days later in the form of a glossy flyer that appeared in every mailbox on our street. Professional layout, high-quality photos, and the kind of inflammatory headline that would make a tabloid editor weep with envy. "Protect our community. The truth about commercial operations in residential Willowbrook." I'm standing in my driveway at 7 a.m., the sharp morning air burning my lungs while I held this piece of propaganda with hands trembling between rage and disbelief. She'd weaponized her real estate marketing skills to create a hit piece that would have impressed Stalin's propaganda ministry. Photos of my truck taken from deceptive angles that made it look like a commercial fleet. Fabricated quotes from concerned neighbors about declining property values and disrupted neighborhood tranquility. The crown jewel was a picture of my house with the caption, "Is this the residential character we want to preserve in Willowbrook Estates?" Frank appeared beside me like a silver-haired avenging angel, clutching his own copy of the character assassination. The smell of his morning coffee mixed with the crisp December air as he studied the flyer with a prosecutor's eye. "This crosses every legal line," he said quietly. "Defamation, targeted harassment, possibly libel depending on those manufactured quotes." But the real gut punch came in the fine print, paid for by the Willowbrook Community Preservation Committee. Apparently a committee consisting entirely of Delilah and whatever enablers she'd managed to recruit from her real estate network. The psychological impact was immediate and brutal. Neighbors who'd waved at me for months suddenly discovered urgent reasons to avoid eye contact. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down actually crossed the street when she saw me checking my mail, clutching her purse like I might mug her for loose change. The friendly morning conversations died the moment I appeared, replaced by the kind of toxic silence that follows a public execution. But Delilah had committed the kind of strategic blunder that topples dictators. She'd assumed I was isolated, friendless, without allies or resources to mount effective resistance. What she didn't realize was that her previous victims had been watching this war unfold from the shadows, and they were finally finding their courage. The first crack in her psychological fortress came that evening when the Kellys knocked on my door. Danny still wore his delivery uniform. grease embedded under his fingernails, and bone-deep exhaustion carved into every line of his face. His wife Sarah clutched their 6-year-old daughter's hand, and I caught the little girl peeking around her mother's legs with eyes full of curiosity and residual sadness. "Mr. Rivera," Danny said, his voice carrying the special determination that comes from being pushed beyond all reasonable limits. "We read that garbage she distributed, and we want you to know we're not buying it. Neither are a lot of other people." Sarah stepped forward, and I recognized the same steel in her expression that I'd seen in Eleanor Patterson's eyes. She made our daughter cry when she forced us to destroy the swing set, called it an aesthetic disruption that compromised community standards. Our 6-year-old asked why the mean lady hated her playground so much. The image of that little girl's confusion and heartbreak hit me harder than any legal threat Delilah could manufacture. This had evolved beyond property disputes or HOA enforcement. This was about a systematic bully who'd made a child weep for the unforgivable sin of wanting to play in her own backyard. "There's another board meeting scheduled for next week," Danny continued, his jaw set with newfound resolve. "She's calling it Emergency Community Standards Review. But this time, we're going to be there, all of us." Over the following 3 days, something extraordinary happened. The underground network of Delilah's victims began emerging from their forced silence like flowers after a long winter. The Garcias appeared with meticulously documented harassment over their vegetable garden. Apparently growing tomatoes violated some imaginary covenant about agricultural activities in residential zones. The Johnsons shared photos of their dog run that Delilah had declared unsightly structures, despite being completely legal and professionally maintained. Most revealing was the visit from the Hendersons, who lived directly across from Delilah's fortress-like mansion. Tom Henderson was a mild-mannered accountant who'd never caused trouble for anyone, but his wife Maria burned with righteous fury when she described Delilah's crusade against their teenager's basketball hoop. She labeled it a noise nuisance and demanded immediate removal, Maria said, her slight accent thickening with suppressed rage. "My son is 17, honor roll student, never been in any trouble. But she wants to steal the one place he can decompress after school because it interferes with her sacred afternoon nap schedule." The pattern crystallized with terrifying clarity. Delilah hadn't just targeted me. She'd been systematically terrorizing anyone who didn't conform to her sterile vision of suburban perfection. Working families, children, anyone whose lifestyle deviated from her sanitized suburban fantasy. But as Frank observed while organizing our growing mountain of harassment documentation, she'd also committed the fatal error that destroys tyrants throughout history, creating too many enemies simultaneously. "Divide and conquer is effective strategy," he explained, spreading complaint letters across my kitchen table. "But when you attempt to conquer everyone at once, they inevitably unite against you. And Marcus, a truly united neighborhood becomes an unstoppable force." My security cameras captured her that night, prowling the streets in her white Mercedes like a predator sensing danger. 3 complete circuits of the block, slowing outside houses where lights still glowed, trying to decode why her psychological warfare was backfiring so spectacularly. What she couldn't see was the revolution brewing in living rooms and around kitchen tables throughout Willowbrook Estates. Her isolated, intimidated victims were discovering they weren't alone, and they were preparing for war. The revolution I'd been expecting came from an unexpected source: Frank's obsession with paperwork and my inability to sleep. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday night, and I was hunched over my laptop in the kitchen, unable to shut my brain off after another day of Delilah's psychological warfare. Frank had suggested I research property liens and assessment records, standard due diligence for any HOA dispute, he'd said. What I found instead was a financial house of cards that made my blood run cold. Delilah Thornberry owed the Willowbrook Estates HOA $8,400 in unpaid special assessments. I stared at the screen, reading the county records 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation, but there it was, documented in black and white, 2 years of delinquent payments for roof repairs, street maintenance, and community improvements. The same assessments she'd been religiously collecting from the rest of us while wielding her authority like a medieval warlord. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Property tax records showed she was 2 months behind on her mortgage payments despite her supposedly thriving real estate career. Credit reports, publicly available through property liens, revealed 3 refinances in 18 months, each one larger than the last. The woman who'd been terrorizing our neighborhood over property values was drowning in debt. But the real bombshell was buried in Colorado HOA statutes, Section 38-33.3-209. Board members must be current on all HOA assessments to legally serve. Delinquent members are automatically disqualified from holding office or making binding decisions. Every fine she'd issued, every violation notice, every board meeting she'd presided over for the past 18 months, legally void. I called Frank at 6 a.m., probably waking him up, but too excited to care about social niceties. Frank, I found it. I found her Achilles heel. Marcus, do you know what time it is? She's been serving illegally for 18 months, delinquent on assessments, which disqualifies her from the board under Colorado law. Every decision she's made is unenforceable. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Frank's voice came back, sharp and fully awake. Are you absolutely certain about those records? County database, pulled directly from the assessor's office. She owes us $8,400, Frank. She's been playing dictator with money she stole from her own neighbors. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Marcus, this changes everything. But we need to be strategic about when and how we use this information. That was Frank, always thinking 3 moves ahead. We agreed to keep this discovery secret until the perfect moment to deploy it. Let Delilah continue digging her own legal grave while we built an airtight case around her financial deception. But the knowledge burned inside me like acid. Every time I saw her white Mercedes cruising the neighborhood, every time she appeared at someone's door with her clipboard of manufactured authority, I wanted to scream the truth from my rooftop. This woman had been systematically abusing power she legally didn't possess, funded by money she'd stolen from the very people she was terrorizing. The irony was delicious and infuriating in equal measure. Delilah, the self-appointed guardian of community standards, was the biggest covenant violator in Willowbrook Estates. Every speech about property values, every lecture about following rules, every fine she'd imposed, all of it coming from someone who'd been breaking the most fundamental rule of HOA governance. Frank spent the next week quietly researching precedent cases while I continued my role as the neighborhood's public enemy number 1. We needed to understand exactly how to weaponize this information for maximum legal and psychological impact. What we discovered was that Colorado courts took HOA board fraud very seriously. Delinquent board members who made decisions while disqualified could face personal liability for damages, plus restitution for all fines illegally collected. In some cases, homeowners had successfully sued for triple damages plus attorney fees. Delilah's financial house of cards wasn't just collapsing, it was about to bury her under an avalanche of legal consequences she'd never seen coming. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and she had no idea the trap was already closing around her. The war room materialized in my kitchen over the following week, transformed from a simple breakfast nook into the command center for what Frank called Operation Concrete Justice. Coffee-stained legal pads covered every surface, highlighted printouts of Colorado statutes were taped to the walls, and my laptop had become a shrine to municipal codes and construction regulations. Frank arrived every morning at 7 a.m. sharp with his leather briefcase and the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 40 years dismantling opponents in courtrooms. Eleanor Patterson brought intelligence from her network of neighborhood spies, along with enough homemade cookies to fuel a small army. The Kellys contributed social media documentation and the kind of righteous anger that only comes from watching your child's happiness destroyed by petty bureaucracy. But the real game-changer walked through my door on a Wednesday evening in the form of Danny Restrepo, my old Army logistics buddy who'd built half the concrete foundations in suburban Denver. "Rivera, you beautiful bastard," he said, crushing me in a bear hug that probably cracked several ribs. "Frank told me about your little HOA problem. Sounds like you need something permanent and immovable." Danny was 51, built like a concrete mixer with arms, and possessed the kind of engineering mind that could move mountains, literally, in some cases. We'd served together in Afghanistan, where his specialty was creating defensive positions that could survive direct mortar strikes. If anyone could design something truly unmovable, it was Danny. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said, spreading blueprint paper across my kitchen table while Eleanor refilled his coffee mug. 4 decorative concrete planters, each weighing exactly 8,000 pounds when filled with soil and plants. Custom designed, professionally installed, positioned along your property line to permanently solve your driveway blocking problem. The specifications were beautiful in their simplicity. Reinforced concrete cores with steel rebar frameworks, decorative aggregate finishes that would complement the neighborhood's aesthetic, and integrated drainage systems to prevent water accumulation. Each planter would be 42 inches high, exactly 1 inch below the municipal code requirement for building permits. The beauty of this plan, Frank explained while reviewing Danny's engineering drawings, is that everything falls under your absolute property rights. Colorado law is crystal clear. Homeowners can install decorative landscaping features within their boundary lines without HOA approval, provided they don't violate specific covenant restrictions. I'd already verified that our covenants contained no language restricting decorative garden features. Delilah's obsession with control hadn't extended to landscape architecture, a tactical oversight that was about to cost her everything. The financial investment was significant but manageable. $12,000 for materials, engineering, and professional installation. My IT consulting income could absorb the cost, especially knowing that Delilah's illegal fines would eventually be refunded with interest. But the psychological impact would be priceless. These weren't just planters, they were 32,000 pounds of permanent victory. Once installed, she could never block my driveway again without committing felony property destruction. Eleanor's reconnaissance network had provided the perfect timing window. Delilah was scheduled to attend a 3-day real estate conference in Denver, leaving town Friday morning and returning Monday evening. Danny's crew could complete the installation over the weekend while she was gone, presenting her with an immovable fait accompli upon her return. The key to military logistics, Danny explained while calculating concrete cure times, is overwhelming force applied with perfect timing. She won't even know what hit her until it's too late to stop it. Frank had prepared our legal defenses with the thoroughness of someone planning a Supreme Court case. Property surveys confirmed the planters would sit entirely within my boundary lines. Municipal codes verified no permits were required for structures under 42 inches. HOA covenants contained no restrictions on decorative landscaping features. Most importantly, we documented every aspect of Delilah's harassment campaign. Security camera footage, violation notices, towing receipts, witness statements from terrorized neighbors, a comprehensive legal record that would justify the planters as reasonable defensive measures against continued harassment. The Kellys had volunteered to coordinate neighborhood support, organizing a Welcome Back BBQ for the Monday after installation. The entire street would be invited to admire the new landscaping features, while Delilah returned to discover her power had been permanently neutralized. As Frank observed while reviewing our battle plans, successful warfare required 3 elements: superior intelligence, overwhelming force, and perfect timing. Delilah's financial vulnerabilities gave us intelligence. Danny's concrete expertise provided overwhelming force. Her conference absence offered perfect timing. Thursday night, I stood in my driveway visualizing the completed project. 4 massive planters positioned like concrete sentinels filled with winter-hardy plants and decorated with landscape lighting. Beautiful, expensive-looking, and absolutely immovable without heavy machinery she'd never be able to justify using. But more than that, they represented something Delilah had never understood, that when you systematically terrorize people, eventually they stop running and start fighting back. The concrete would cure over the weekend, but the real foundation had been building for months. A community united against tyranny, armed with legal knowledge and unshakable determination. Operation Concrete Justice was about to begin. The concrete trucks arrived at dawn on Saturday morning like a military convoy, their diesel engines rumbling through the quiet neighborhood with the authority of heavy artillery. I watched from my kitchen window as Danny's crew began transforming my property line into an impregnable fortress, one wheelbarrow of concrete at a time. The installation was a masterpiece of precision engineering. Danny had positioned the planters with surgical accuracy, each one exactly on my property line, spaced perfectly to prevent any vehicle from accessing my driveway perimeter while maintaining an elegant aesthetic that would make Martha Stewart weep with envy. The reinforced concrete cores went down 8 feet into the Colorado clay, anchored with steel rebar frameworks that could probably survive a direct meteor strike. By Sunday evening, 4 magnificent concrete planters stood guard along my driveway like ancient monoliths. 8,000 pounds each, filled with premium soil and winter-hardy evergreens, decorated with subtle landscape lighting that cast dramatic shadows across the aggregate surfaces. They were beautiful, functional, and absolutely immovable without industrial equipment. But Delilah's reaction exceeded even my wildest expectations. Monday morning at 7:23 a.m., her white Mercedes screeched into the neighborhood like a banshee emerging from hell. I watched through my security cameras as she slammed on the brakes in front of my house, her perfectly composed facade cracking like ice under pressure. She sat in her car for a full 3 minutes, staring at the planters with the expression of someone witnessing the apocalypse. Then she exploded into action with the fury of a Category 5 hurricane. First, she circled the planters like a predator studying prey, taking photos from every conceivable angle while muttering what appeared to be a steady stream of profanity. The morning air carried the sharp scent of her expensive perfume, mixed with the rage sweat that comes from discovering your power has been permanently neutralized. By 8:15 a.m., she was on her phone, pacing my property line like a caged animal while screaming at someone about unauthorized construction and immediate removal orders. 20 minutes later, a city building inspector arrived in a pickup truck, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. I watched from my kitchen window as the inspector examined the planters with professional thoroughness. He measured heights, checked property lines, reviewed Danny's engineering specifications with the careful attention of someone who understood liability issues. After 30 minutes of inspection, he handed Delilah a clipboard and walked away shaking his head. Her shriek of frustrated rage could probably be heard in the next county. The building inspector's verdict was swift and final. Everything was completely legal. Professional installation, proper drainage, within property boundaries, below permit requirements. The planters violated no municipal codes, no building regulations, and no HOA covenants. They were, in the inspector's official opinion, excellent examples of decorative landscape architecture. But Delilah's desperation was just getting started. By noon, she'd hired Morrison & Associates, one of Denver's most expensive law firms, to research nuisance landscaping claims and intentional property devaluation lawsuits. The certified letter arrived that afternoon, demanding immediate planter removal within 30 days and threatening legal action for spite structures designed to harass neighboring properties. Frank read the legal threat over coffee, his silver eyebrows climbing toward his hairline with amusement. "This is what desperation looks like in legal form," he said, setting the letter down like contaminated waste. "She's hired attorneys who clearly haven't researched Colorado property law. These threats have no legal foundation whatsoever." But the real revelation came Tuesday morning when Frank received a phone call that changed everything. "That was Morrison & Associates," he told me, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. "They're withdrawing from Delilah's case. Apparently their background check discovered her HOA board disqualification, and they refused to represent someone making decisions without legal authority." The dominoes were falling faster than I dared to hope. Delilah's expensive legal team had abandoned her, her building inspector complaint had backfired spectacularly, and her attempts to remove the planters had only highlighted her own legal vulnerabilities. But the psychological impact was the most satisfying part. Every morning she had to drive past those concrete monuments to her powerlessness. 32,000 pounds of permanent defeat, beautifully landscaped and impossible to ignore. The woman who'd spent months blocking my driveway could never do it again without committing felony property destruction. The neighborhood response was overwhelmingly positive. Residents stopped by to admire the professional landscaping. Several families asked for Danny's contact information to plan their own improvements, and property values actually increased due to the enhanced curb appeal. Most telling was the reaction from the Kellys' 6-year-old daughter, who asked her parents if the pretty flower boxes meant the mean lady couldn't be mean anymore. Even children understood what the planters represented: permanent protection against tyranny. Wednesday evening brought the coup de grace. Delilah appeared in my driveway one final time, her usual composure completely shattered. Dark circles under her eyes, hair slightly disheveled, the desperate look of someone whose world was collapsing around her. "You think you've won," she said, her voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. I looked at the 4 immovable sentinels guarding my property, then back at the woman who'd terrorized my neighborhood for years. "I know I have." Delilah's final desperate gambit began with what can only be described as a neighborhood-wide propaganda blitz that made her previous character assassination attempts look like amateur hour. She'd clearly learned nothing from her legal team's abandonment and was doubling down on psychological warfare with the reckless fury of someone watching their empire crumble. The first salvo arrived Thursday morning in the form of a petition she was personally hand-delivering to every house in Willowbrook Estates. I watched through my security cameras as she knocked on doors with the manic energy of a political candidate on election day, clutching a clipboard thick with official-looking documents. Eleanor Patterson intercepted one of these documents and brought it to my kitchen war room within an hour. The petition was a masterpiece of legal-sounding gibberish. Emergency removal of hazardous landscaping structures complete with fabricated safety concerns about structural instability and pedestrian traffic hazards. She was claiming my professionally engineered planters posed a danger to neighborhood children. She's collected exactly 3 signatures, Eleanor reported with obvious satisfaction. The Hendersons told her to get off their property. The Garcias slammed the door in her face. Mrs. Chen wouldn't even answer her doorbell. But Delilah's isolation was driving her to increasingly unhinged behavior. Frank's network of legal contacts reported that she'd contacted 4 different law firms in 2 days, searching for someone willing to take her spite structure case. Each firm had declined after discovering her board disqualification, leaving her without representation and spiraling deeper into financial desperation. The real psychological meltdown began Friday evening with a social media campaign that showcased exactly how far she'd fallen from suburban sophistication. Her Facebook posts became increasingly unhinged rants about neighborhood infiltrators and property value terrorists that read like manifestos from someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. "These concrete monstrosities are destroying our community character," she posted at 2:17 a.m., complete with blurry photos of my planters taken in darkness. "When did Willowbrook become a dumping ground for industrial eyesores? We must take action before it's too late." The comments section became a brutal reality check. Neighbor after neighbor defended the planters' aesthetic appeal while sharing their own stories of Delilah's harassment. The Kellys posted photos of their demolished swing set. The Garcias documented her attacks on their vegetable garden. The Johnsons shared timestamps showing her midnight surveillance activities. Frank advised me to screenshot every post and comment for our growing harassment documentation file. "She's creating evidence of her own instability," he observed while printing Facebook posts at 3 a.m. "This kind of public meltdown will be crucial when we expose her board disqualification." But Saturday brought the most concerning escalation yet. My security cameras caught her driving past my house 17 times between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., slowing to a crawl each time to photograph the planters from different angles. She was exhibiting classic stalking behavior, her white Mercedes becoming a fixture of obsessive surveillance that had neighbors calling each other in concern. The breaking point came Sunday afternoon during what should have been a peaceful neighborhood barbecue. Danny had organized a welcome-back celebration for the completed landscaping project. With half the street gathered in my driveway admiring the professional installation while children played safely around the beautifully lit planters. Delilah appeared like a wrathful specter, marching across my lawn in designer heels that left divots in the winter grass. Her usual polished appearance had deteriorated into something approaching dishevelment, smeared makeup, wrinkled blazer, and wild eyes that suggested she'd been awake for days. "This is private property harassment," she shrieked at the gathered neighbors, waving printed copies of her failed petition like weapons. "These people are destroying everything we've built here, our property values, our community standards, our way of life." The assembled crowd fell silent, children hiding behind parents while adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the composed HOA president they'd known. This was someone in the grip of a complete psychological breakdown. Danny stepped forward with the calm authority of someone who'd diffused actual combat situations. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property during a lawful gathering. I suggest you leave voluntarily." "I am the HOA board president," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I have authority over every property in this development. You cannot exclude me from community oversight responsibilities." Frank chose that moment to deploy the nuclear option we'd been saving for maximum impact. "Actually, Delilah," he said in his measured attorney voice that carried clearly across the stunned crowd, "you've been legally disqualified from the board for 18 months due to delinquent assessment payments. You have no authority over anything." The silence that followed was absolute. 60-plus neighbors staring at a woman whose carefully constructed facade had just disintegrated in front of everyone she'd spent years trying to control. Delilah's face cycled through shock, rage, and something approaching terror before she turned and fled across the lawn, stumbling in her expensive heels while muttering threats about lawsuits and consequences that everyone now understood she had no power to enforce. The revolution had just witnessed its dictator's final moment of public humiliation, and it was beautiful. The emergency HOA meeting that would end Delilah's reign of terror was scheduled for Thursday night at 7 p.m. in the Willowbrook Community Center, and by 6:30, it was clear this wouldn't be the quiet board session she'd envisioned. Cars lined both sides of Maple Street. Residents streamed toward the building in groups, and the parking lot buzzed with the electric energy of a community finally ready to confront its tormentor. Frank and I arrived early to find the community center packed beyond capacity. Every folding chair was occupied, people stood along the walls, and late arrivals spilled into the hallway outside. I counted at least 80 residents, more than had attended every previous HOA meeting combined. The air thrummed with whispered conversations and suppressed anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. But the real surprise was the Channel 7 news crew setting up cameras near the front of the room. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson had contacted them about the neighborhood harassment story, and they'd arrived expecting a routine suburban dispute. What they were about to witness would make their evening broadcast legendary. Delilah entered at exactly 7 p.m., her usual composed facade restored, but her eyes carrying the desperate gleam of someone fighting for survival. She'd dressed for battle in her sharpest business suit and highest heels, carrying a thick briefcase that suggested extensive preparation. Behind her trailed the remaining board members, 3 middle-aged residents who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they surveyed the hostile crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Delilah began, her voice projecting with practiced authority as she arranged papers at the front table. "Thank you for attending this emergency session to address the ongoing security concerns and community standards violations that threaten our neighborhood's character and property values." She launched into a PowerPoint presentation that was equal parts impressive and insane. Professional slides detailing commercial encroachment patterns and residential security threats, complete with aerial photos of my property that made my corner lot look like a fortress compound. She'd turned my landscaping project into evidence of some kind of suburban insurgency. "As these documented images clearly demonstrate," she continued, clicking through slides with prosecutorial precision, "we face unprecedented challenges to the residential tranquility that defines Willowbrook Estates. Unauthorized commercial activities, aggressive landscaping installations, and systematic defiance of community standards threaten everything we've worked to preserve." The crowd grew restless as her presentation continued, residents shifting in their seats and exchanging glances that ranged from incredulous to openly hostile. She was describing their neighborhood like a war zone under siege when everyone present knew the real threat had been sitting at the board table for years. When my turn came to respond, I stood slowly and faced the packed room with the calm confidence that comes from holding nuclear weapons. "Thank you for that creative interpretation of suburban landscaping, Delilah. I've prepared some alternative materials for consideration. I distributed copies of the actual HOA covenants, Colorado property law summaries, and documented evidence of systematic harassment that Frank and I had compiled over months. First, let's review what our covenants actually say about home-based businesses and decorative landscaping. I read directly from page 12, highlighting the explicit permissions that contradicted every claim she'd made. Second, let's examine the documented pattern of selective enforcement and procedural violations that have characterized this board's recent decisions. I presented timeline after timeline of harassment, illegal towing, midnight surveillance, fabricated violations, and systematic intimidation of families throughout our neighborhood. The crowd grew increasingly agitated as residents recognized their own experiences in my documentation. But most importantly, I continued, let's address the fundamental question of board authority and legal standing. That was Frank's cue to stand, his silver hair and courtroom presence commanding immediate attention from every person in the room. "Before this board takes any further action," Frank announced in his measured attorney voice, "there's a critical procedural matter that must be addressed. According to Colorado, Revised Statutes Section 38-33.3-209, HOA board members must be current on all assessment payments to legally serve." He held up copies of county records showing Delilah's delinquent payments, and the room fell silent except for the whir of news cameras capturing every moment. Delilah Thornberry has been delinquent on HOA assessments for 18 months, owing $8,400 in unpaid special assessments. Under Colorado law, this automatically disqualifies her from board service. Every decision she's made during this period is legally void. The explosion was immediate and deafening, 80 voices erupting simultaneously in outrage, disbelief, and vindication. Residents who'd paid thousands in fines while their board president owed even more. Families who'd been terrorized by someone with no legal authority. The sound was like a dam bursting, releasing years of suppressed frustration and anger. Delilah's face cycled through shock, rage, and pure panic as she realized her carefully constructed authority had just evaporated in front of the entire neighborhood and local news cameras. "This is lies and harassment," she screamed over the chaos, pointing at me with shaking fingers. "Vindictive neighbors trying to destroy community leadership. I'll sue everyone in this room." The Channel 7 reporter stepped forward with microphone extended. "Miss Thornberry, will you comment on the documented assessment delinquencies?" Delilah's response was caught in perfect high definition. "This is all lies and discrimination. These people don't understand community standards." "The county records speak for themselves," I replied calmly, and watched 18 months of tyranny collapse in real time. The remaining board members immediately called for her resignation. The vote was unanimous. The immediate aftermath of Delilah's public destruction was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I'd ever imagined. Within 24 hours, she'd submitted her resignation letter via email, a single paragraph of legalese that couldn't disguise the sound of complete defeat. Her house appeared on the market that same weekend with a motivated seller sign that might as well have read, "Fleeing in disgrace." The moving trucks arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, and I watched from my kitchen window as Delilah's white Mercedes followed them out of Willowbrook Estates for the final time. No backward glances, no final gestures of defiance, just the pathetic retreat of a bully who'd finally met superior firepower. The neighborhood felt lighter the moment her taillights disappeared, like we'd all been holding our breath for years and could finally exhale. Eleanor Patterson's unanimous election as HOA president ushered in what residents started calling the golden age of Willowbrook. Board meetings transformed from adversarial tribunals into potluck dinners where neighbors actually solved problems through conversation instead of litigation. Her first official act was establishing transparency policies that required all financial records to be publicly available, ensuring no future board member could hide delinquent payments behind manufactured authority. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Property values increased 18% over 8 months, not through intimidation, but because word spread about a neighborhood where families could actually thrive. The Garcia's vegetable garden became a showcase that inspired 6 other households to start growing their own food. The Kellys installed a playground that became the unofficial headquarters for every child in Willowbrook, their laughter echoing where Delilah's threats once poisoned the air. My IT consulting business exploded beyond anything I'd imagined. The story of defeating an HOA dictator with concrete planners spread through Denver's professional networks like wildfire, bringing me clients who appreciated both technical expertise and creative problem solving. The circular driveway that had started this war became a symbol throughout Jefferson County, proof that ordinary people could defeat bureaucratic bullying through preparation and persistence. But the most unexpected victory came 6 months later during Eleanor's first anniversary barbecue. That's where I met Sarah Mitchell, a recently divorced teacher who'd bought the old Henderson house with her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah had heard the entire Delilah saga and approached me with eyes that sparkled with admiration for someone who'd fought back against impossible odds. Emma immediately claimed my planters as personal playground equipment, scrambling over them with the fearless joy that only children possess. Watching her play where concrete barriers had once trapped me felt like witnessing literal resurrection, childhood innocence blooming in soil that had once supported tyranny. The planters themselves achieved legendary status throughout suburban Colorado. Featured in Better Homes and Gardens as defensive landscaping done right, they inspired dozens of homeowners to install their own artistic concrete features. Danny's business tripled in size from referrals, and he started offering tyrant-proof installation packages for HOA harassment victims across 3 counties. Frank's monthly Know Your Rights workshops became standing-room-only events, teaching homeowners about board qualification requirements and legal protections against harassment. The knowledge that saved Willowbrook spread like antibodies through Jefferson County's bloodstream, immunizing communities against future dictators. The annual Veterans Building Communities Scholarship Fund launched that fall with our first fundraising event in my circular driveway, the same space Delilah had tried to control through spite and intimidation. We raised $6,800 for Maria Santos, whose combat veteran father had started his own landscaping business after leaving the Army. The ceremony took place beside the planters, with Maria's father joking that concrete had built both his career and his daughter's future. 3 years later, I'm writing this on a warm summer evening, watching neighborhood children play around those 32,000 pounds of decorative victory. The landscape lighting casts gentle shadows on evergreens that have grown tall and strong, their roots deep in soil that once supported fear but now nurtures freedom. The sound of laughter carries where threats and intimidation used to rule supreme. Sometimes I wonder about Delilah's fate, wherever she landed after fleeing Willowbrook in disgrace. Part of me hopes she found peace and learned from her spectacular downfall. But mostly, I hope she never gets the chance to terrorize another neighborhood the way she terrorized ours. In the end, she taught me the most valuable lesson of my adult life. Bullies only have the power you allow them to have. Sometimes the best response to an immovable tyrant is becoming something even more immovable yourself. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. You're definitely not fighting alone. And smash that subscribe button for HOA Stories, where we prove that justice gets served best with concrete evidence, and the little guy always wins in the end.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.